You're listening to the Owens Recovery Science Podcast, your source for all things blood flow restriction training. I'm your host, Johnny Owens. All right, fellas, what's going on? Long time no talk through a podcast. We talk daily, but a long time no talk. So how's it going, everyone?
Very good.
Good. We got Kyle, we got Zach, aka Swole Team 6, apparently on our call here in Ben Weatherford. So anyways, I kind of explained why it's been so long. As usual, things are lots of times when it comes to this, on my end, just getting things going and scheduled. But it's good to be back. And so, man, we have so much new stuff that we're going to have to cover over these next several podcasts because there's been a lot of cool literature coming out. Today, we're going to talk about something that we get asked a whole lot at courses or people asking us through email or whatever. And that's like, what are the progressions? How do you kind of program BFR after injury from the acute phase to this kind of subacute intermediate phase where maybe they can start doing more? And then as they're progressing into the chronic phase, where they might be able to handle loads, what are you guys doing there? And so obviously we see a lot of different things going on. So I think we can share all that. We can share what the literature probably says best. But I think just these basic progressions of BFR is a topic that should be touched on here to give kind of what the overall thoughts are. And so kind of before we get that going, just an overview of what everyone's been up to. I'll go first. So, I had some medical stuff with my wife, so I've actually haven't traveled as much as normally, which has been beautiful. I kind of like this lifestyle of being at home for 2 weeks at a time. It's amazing how much honeydews I've been getting done, but I had a great time. So we do an annual update at the NBA Combine. And so that's really cool. At the Combine, all the medical folks from the teams get together. And we get in and talk shop. And so I give an update on what's going on in the literature, what's going on in our current research. And then we also get together and just discuss with the teams what everyone's doing, what everyone's seeing, and a big question and answer session. And so that's really cool. The hot topic was soft tissue injuries, because that's primarily what they deal with. And we actually just put a blog post out. If you're part of our certified providers, you would have got an email on BFR after a soft tissue injury. The other hot topic was recovery, which I think is a terrible word because I don't really know what that means. So resilience is what we use in the DOD. The line I use with them is, a service member, their recovery in battle is after rucking 20 miles with an 80-pound sack on is to sleep in a tent and take in some MREs that night. So you got to build resilience before you are able to quickly recover. And then I flew straight from the Combine to Green Bay, which was a good time of year to go. There wasn't snow, but it was cold. My hotel was across the street from the facility. So I was staying across the street from Lambeau, and it was Bellin Healthcare, which is the new facility for the folks that take care of the Green Bay Packers. Freaking amazing. If you rehab there, it's all glass, and the rehab facility while you're rehabbing, you sit there and you see Lambeau Field right across the street. So they pretty much got the entire Packers market for rehab. Any Packers fan is going to want to rehab there. But my warm ass Texan almost took an Uber across the street because it was raining. It was like 52 degrees and all I had was a t-shirt. So I actually was checking Uber because it was too cold to go with my bag, but I didn't have one. So yeah, man, that's what I've been up to. I'm about to head up to Grand Rounds at Northwestern and probably going to go hit one of our NBA teams that couldn't make the Combine talk because they're in the series right now. But that's where I am, man. Kyle, what have you been up to, brother?
Well, we had a nice big course out here in LA in April on Weed Day on 420. I chose that date very well, and so nice. I made everybody tell me stories of weed stories, which there's a bunch of therapists, so everybody was just kind of like no stories at all. It's a bummer, or none they wanted to share.
Therapists are so lame, man.
I tried to get them to, and they just did not take the opportunity to come clean and just have a good laugh. But,
I might have stories.
Yeah, we can tell those in a minute. I should have piped you in. And no pun intended.
Yeah.
And then
We'll edit that out. We'll edit that out, guys.
Wait,
Yeah.
We'll edit that out. That was pretty bad.
I was going to ask if you had a bunch of stories where like, well, from what I hear, my friends tell me that this.
Yeah. So, and then there are a few just different courses here and there. Went to University of Iowa, University of Arkansas, and just got back this past weekend from Bozeman, Montana, at Laura Obstedal's place out there. And that Bozeman, Montana is beautiful. I mean, it's awesome. So I had a great time there. I did learn a fun fact in Bozeman, Montana. If you're at the brewery, that place closes at 8. Like all breweries close up shop at 8. They're not serving beer after 8, but you still can buy to-go beer. They just can't pour you beer to drink there. So
good, yeah.
Good. So
you can drive home with it. That's great.
And yeah, exactly. It's just an FYI. And then just today, I did a little talk for Azusa Pacific doctor of physical therapy program out in Azusa, just kind of on the other side of LA from me. And that was a really fun time. Had a good crew of students there. So
nice.
Yeah.
We've had so many patients reach out looking for someone doing BFR in Bozeman, Montana. I mean, I know Bozeman just because I've had that question asked. It's crazy. So you're feeling a need out there, man. I don't know.
You got a good crew of folks out there now. So
Ben, what's up? What have you been up to, man?
I actually have been a little slower also. I stayed home last weekend for Bryson's 4th birthday, but before that I had training in Dallas for the Mavericks and Rangers crew over there. And then the weekend you were at Bella and I was at Twin Cities Orthopedics up in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
St. Paul area. And that place is incredible. They had me at place called the Training House, which is right across from the practice facility for the Vikings, because they're the provider for the Vikings. So everything's branded TCO everywhere on the Vikings facility. And it's 19,000 square feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. So a very cool place. And then I guess tomorrow I'm headed to Waco, Texas to do a training for Baylor Scott and White.
Nice. Yeah, Twin Cities, man, that facility looks amazing. I need to get up there and see it. Someone could just Google that training house and check it out. I mean, Bellin, Google that one too. It's amazing. And that one's badass. My old buddy who was our chair of sports medicine, Steve Sabota, then he went off to West Point, orthopedic surgeon. He's up there at Twin Cities now. And so he's a good dude. He covers I think he covers the hockey team now in DC. But
right.
He wasn't there, was he?
No, and I hear there's another halfway decent surgeon heading up that way also.
LeProd's going that way, big time.
Yep.
Big time. All right, and Zach, we don't have time for you to go over your 90 courses you did in May, but what have you been up to, man? So just anything that was cool.
Man, so when you guys were in Bellum and then Minneapolis, I was in Baltimore at the Under Armour facility.
One of the one up us. I was at Under Armour.
Hey, I mean, it was. I got to admit, it was probably one of the coolest courses that I've done. I mean, the lecture was done in a bank vault, like a legit bank vault, and then the facility was basically 2 stories. So on the main level was probably about close to a 45-50 yard AstroTurf field, and then on each side of that they had all your squat racks, Olympic lifting platforms. All the equipment was hammer strength, so plate loaded machines. And then you go up above to the 2nd floor, and that's where they had all the aerobic equipment. So you could basically be on the bike but still look over and watch people exercising below. So it was a pretty cool layout from there. Also was up at the University of Delaware earlier that week. And
the home of E-STEM.
Yeah. So it was crazy. So we were talking about some of the studies, like the passive cyclic BFR studies, where you combine it with some stim and get superior results compared to just cell swelling alone. And they were like, well, what is the intensity of the stim? And it was like, somewhere around 10% MVC. And they're like, yeah, we don't stim anywhere below 30. Typically we're at 50% MVC is where we stim at. And I said, I was like, really? And that's tolerated? And they're like, yeah. They're like, you look at us about with the stim, the way that we look at you with putting a tourniquet on people. You know, it's something that we do every day, and it's something that you do every day, and you don't even think twice about it, you know? So yeah, it was pretty cool. We so went down at lunch and with some of their therapists, hooked them up to their biodex, stemmed them with the Natsume protocol, and they stemmed at 50% MVC. So one of the nicer facilities from an equipment standpoint. I mean, they had 4 biodexes in their treatment space in the clinic space at the university. So it was pretty cool from there. And then after that was up at Kentucky at the Children's Hospital. So had the opportunity to train another children's group, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the third specific children's group that I've worked with. So it'll be good to kind of get them in. Hopefully, you know, we'll start seeing some pediatric research rolling out.
Man, we're wrapping them up. You've done 3. We've got Andrews Children's, Texas Children's. No, we have Kennedy Krieger was one you did up there at Hopkins as well.
Yeah. So Kennedy Krieger, Akron Children's Hospital, and then I've been down at IMG twice, and their staff that serves the medical needs is from Johns Hopkins. So, and we've worked with Johns Hopkins as well.
So that's kind of this thing. You know, unfortunately, we just don't have any published pediatric literature with BFR right now. It's not really, you know, I see peds and would see the service members' kids, but I never would do research, or I wasn't doing research in that world, so it's not my wheelhouse. But clinically, it's obviously being done quite a bit at some of these like power centers around the country. So I mean, if IMG is doing it with
exactly,
high-priced kids down there, that's a big deal. And I think that's very cool with Delaware, and that's something. You know, as we're looking at more and more of BFR and eSTEM research coming out, that's why I'm glad we have connections with Dr. Manal and the folks at Delaware to help maybe guide a little bit more of this higher intensity type stuff. You know, we're setting up a BFR total knee trial. It looks like it's moving forward pretty smoothly, and you know, they're Delaware folks. They're not at Delaware, but they all are out of that program at another university, and they're in that same boat. You know, high intensity, high frequency. Got to get it on, you know, twice a day type of thing. And so if you listen to this and you're one of our certified providers and you didn't get it, we have a PDF that we put out of best practices for eSTEM post-surgically all the way down to the best portable unit that Dr. Manal helped me put together when I was with her at the ABTA Ortho Sections meeting in Denver. And we're also happy to share that with anyone else that's not in our group, but it's good stuff, man. Cool. Well, everyone's been busy except for me. I've been chilling, just joking. And so, anyways, let's move into the meat and guts of this podcast here. So, first thing I want to touch on before we get into progressions is just something that has come out recently, and that was a position stand paper. It came out I think it was last month that the full text finally came out, and this is in Frontiers in Physiology, and it's a full text. So everything in Frontiers is full text. So if you just go on and put in blood flow restriction, exercise, position, stand in Frontiers in Physiology, you will get the full text of it. And so the genesis of this was we were kind of looking at we needed more of a standardized approach across the board. You know, from the way we're doing it clinically to the way it's being done in the research world, so that we can always compare apples to apples. And so, if you look at some of the early BFR stuff, you know, you're just trying to even figure out what width of cuff they used, and you know, everyone got a standardized pressure, and so then we're seeing now that maybe some people were getting more occlusion than others, and then it makes it hard to understand. You know, were the results really true? And if some of them, the results weren't as good, if everyone got equal percentage of pressure based on their arterial occlusion, would results be different? And so Dr. Patterson, Stephen Patterson, was the one who had the idea. And then he just kind of reached out and got quite a few of us all together. And what's cool is it's kind of a global approach. And so you've got folks from the United Kingdom and from Spain and from Denmark and Australia and Qatar, and Brazil. And so it's not just, you're not going to have, this is the way this one region does it. It's pretty much around the world how we all do it. And so the only Americans on there were me and Jeremy Lineky. You got Dr. Abe, who spends a lot of time in America, but he's from Japan, Laurentino from Brazil, et cetera. So the next step is, how do you even write a position paper, and what does that, what does that mean? Because I've never done a position stand before. And so what you do is make sure it's not a review paper, because all you see right now, and I'm guilty, man, I'm the king of getting asked to get on these review papers, is a BFR review. And that's just like, okay, here's what the literature says. A position stand is you look at what the literature says, and then you kind of take the opinion of everyone in this group. And these are a bunch of hardcore scientists. And so there's a lot of opinions. And so you get done, and the whole group will look at it, and everyone kind of chimes in, and you come to a consensus at the end of each little section, and kind of say, okay, this was the final group consensus. So it was pretty cool. So they would get three of us, and kind of team us up to write a specific section. So me and Jeremy Lineky, and then Juan Martin Hernandez, who's a professor out of Spain who does a lot of BFR work, were the first group, or were put into the group, and we wrote the safety section on BFR. And so we basically did everything from muscle damage to thrombus formation to cardiovascular, to reactive oxygen species, and you write your section, and then we turn it into the group, and then you get a lot of red line edits from everybody and chiming in on their part of it. And then after everyone agrees, it all comes together. And so just so everyone kind of understands the genesis of how this was done, we try to make it very non-biased, of just, this is what we see in the literature, this is what we see that looks like it works best. And so if you go through it, I'm not going to go through it all because you can get it, but it goes down all the way to, first section, determining cuff pressure, and at the end, it is therefore recommended to set pressure during BFR exercise based on a measurement of AOP, arterial occlusion pressure, or LOP, which we say lots of times, with pressures ranging from 40 to 80%. Cuff width, and we go to how much load you should do and how much rest period you should do. And if you're doing more of a passive BFR, how frequent you should do it. And then at the end, we put tables together to try and sum up each thing. So I think it's something really cool. Frontiers in Physiology is a really high tier journal to have that in. And so I would encourage people to look at that. And I think it just helps us as a global group get together and encourage everyone, because we're lots of times the reviewers on these papers, to kind of follow these rules so we can compare apples to apples. Cool. You guys read it at all? Looked at it?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to read those things?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
It was required reading, especially my section.
Yeah, no, I think it's
I just found out which section was yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have said that. Mine was the best section.
I think it's a great, kind of gathering of information. I mean, if people are looking for something as an intro to BFR, if they haven't read anything on it yet, it's, got a lot of things there and accounted for. And if nothing else, you're going to find references to a lot of the other articles you should read from there.
Yeah.
So great place to find a lot of information.
And I think, if you're like, man, we get this question all the time. Can you tell us like the 5 best articles to read or whatever? I would say read the position stand, and then get the Techniques in Orthopedics BFR journal that I was the editor on, because that's basically a lot of the same authors who took a topic and wrote an entire paper on each topic, from safety to geriatric to ACL to whatever. And so if you just start at those two, you're going to catch up on probably like 1,000 BFR papers right there. And here's something that's very cool working with these guys is the weed out that they did of papers, of like, okay, no, we've run, like rerunning some stats and looking at, okay, I don't feel happy with the methods on this one. And so, some of the stuff that was put in there is like, we got to drop that one because people weren't comfortable, with exactly what they were seeing in it. So it was very cool seeing such a thorough scientific approach on a lot of it. So it's a great starting point. Cool. All right. There's a million other papers that we're going to get into over the next several podcasts. I promise we're going to keep them coming. But let's get into this. How do I progress BFR? This is a question we get all the time. So I got someone who's injured. All right. Let's just say that we're going surgical. We're going to say surgical, but we can kind of talk about everything. What do you do right after their surgery? What do you do as they do more? What do you do as they're able to really start doing more? When do you stop BFR? When do you increase load? So all of those things, they're great questions, and I think it's a pretty easy model once you understand it. And there's a lot of clinical judgment that goes on, but let's take it off here. So Zach, I'm going to let you kind of start running with this because I know this is something that you get asked a lot as well. So, okay, post-surgical, acutely, I got a patient crutching in. What do we start looking at with BFR?
Yeah, so I think the at the very least, if they can't do anything else, then what we do is we put the cuff on them and then we stem them. Is what we do. That's at the very least if they cannot do anything else. Yeah. So the protocol or the protocol that I use is from the Natsume paper. It's 5 minutes of ischemia followed by 1 minute reperfusion, cycled 4 times with stemmed at with Russian cycling throughout. So it turns into being about 23 minutes of treatment. Mm-hmm. With that, if they're able, at the very minimum, doing quad sets, you can incorporate active motion exercises such as a straight leg raise and go from there. The stem is at least, I try to get at least like 10% of the MBC, which is where that paper was at. Mm-hmm. And then the limb occlusion pressure is at 100% limb occlusion pressure.
So you use 100%?
I do, yeah. So if you look at the methods from that paper, it's a little difficult to fully translate. They base it off thigh circumference. Yeah. But when they base it off thigh circumference, it turns out to, like when you put the cuff on your thigh, and if you measure your thigh, the millimeters of mercury, the pressure turns out to being close to full limb ischemia. And I believe that was the recommendation coming out of that position stand paper as well. When you're doing a passive treatment and you're not doing any sort of resistance, you need to be pretty close to full occlusion.
Yeah, we put a range 70 to 100, but
yeah,
on the high end, right?
So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. I want to really put a bullet point on this. As the load is decreased, it really starts to seem that the pressure of not, and again, we always have to make sure people understand this. Not that I can take this thing up to 500. It's the limb occlusion pressure or the arterial occlusion pressure is higher, right?
Right. If you're and Jamie Bird's paper pretty much followed that same guideline. Mm-hmm. When they looked at it and they did it for 4 days a week for 6 weeks, they did it at 220, which again, the majority of the IPC papers out there uses, if they're going to use an absolute pressure, it's 220. Yeah. It's not full occlusion for everybody, but it's going to be pretty close to full occlusion for the majority of folks. So again, I think
that's like 50%.
Yeah. With the brown cup, I'm sure.
The brown cup.
Yeah. I think we can pretty much reference the Lisandro paper with this also. If it's like 30% of 1 rep max or lower, we probably need 80% limb occlusion or something
right
at that or higher. Yep. Lower the intensity, we probably need to bump that a little closer to full occlusion. Yeah. Hard to say where we go above 80, but.
Okay. So, Zach, first day, I'm on the table. I'm popping pills. I'm pissed off because my knee hurts. And you're going to blast me at 100% day one, or are you going to build up to it?
So that depends on the individual. So, we have two kind of pre-op or surgical papers looking at mechanical pressure where they did IPC. One was a total knee, one was a gallbladder paper. Each of those actually showed outside with no exercise done from a pain standpoint, significant reductions with pain at 24 and 48 hours. So the potential that someone's in pain, that we can mediate that simply just by putting a tourniquet on them. I use that rationale also. But if you have someone who just does not tolerate the pressure, an older individual, total knee replacement, or maybe an individual who just does not like the pressure, yeah, you don't have to go to full occlusion, 80%, 70%, you can reduce it from there. And that's the same thing that I talk about that Ben just referenced. You know, if you're going to actually do resistance exercise, the pressure is important, but also the load is important. So you can modify the load if you need to dip that pressure down even lower. So they did a 40 and 40 and had the same effect as if you're lifting at 85% under free flow conditions. So if someone comes in from a post-op standpoint and they just don't tolerate that pressure, ideally, in the lower extremity, I don't like to go below 60%. If we're using a low load or minimal loads. If they're able to tolerate for a given exercise a higher load, then we can dip that pressure down a little bit lower, but in an acute post-op period, that's probably not going to be the case.
Right. And so just to clarify, those IPC papers, they were pre-surgical that showed reduced.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
So but is it fascinating, you know, pre-surgical, full occlusion, multiple, we think full occlusion, they use the standard pressure, which always kills me, but for multiple bouts, had less pain post-surgery and had less opioid use.
Yeah. The gallbladder paper was less opiate use as well. So that's pretty phenomenal, simply because all you did was just put a tourniquet on someone.
Yeah. And so where's your pad placement? Do you put anything under the cuff?
So I don't. I will put just below the cuff on the VM or on the VL, and then across the VMO as well.
Yeah. And so that's the way we do it. When I was with one of the NBA teams, they had one of those compact systems that have like 5 pads. They have a ton of pads. And so we put the pads all where they typically put them and had the cuff right over it on the player and had no issues at all. And I've talked to that team and several others use the same system. And even with the pads under the cuff, it didn't seem to change, you know, the way the pressure was on the pad or anything like that. So I think potentially too, if you're worried, it's like a small limb and there's not enough room, you could put the pad under the cuff and it's no problem. So how quickly are you trying to get into a flex knee kind of isometric E-stem position? Or are you doing that? Because I know that's
I mean, if they can tolerate it, absolutely, yeah. Especially, let's just say like an ACL, as soon as we can get them into a protective open range position, do it. Yeah. Whether that just be like an isometric, say at stem at 60 degrees.
Yeah.
Stem at 60 degrees, and go from there.
And everything from the Delaware folks, again, I mean, these are the E-stem leaders. When you look at their papers or when Dr. Manal and I were going through some of her stuff, everything to do with stem is at a flex knee, post-op ACL.
Yeah. So I specifically asked them, I said, like, how early are you guys starting open chain? They're like, freaking post-op day or, day of the eval. And they're doing in a protective range. They may do isometrics, very, very early on, but they're going 90 to 45.
Yeah.
I think that's an important point, Johnny. And I think that's something Kyle and I have talked about before, is this idea that, the strain on the ACL when you get into terminal extension. Yeah, absolutely. There's strain on the ACL, but that strain is there when you walk as well. Sure. There was a paper published looking at the strain during the gait phase is actually higher during terminal swing than what you get with doing a full open kinetic chain motion at a 12 rep max load. So, the loads, the strain is there. And then this paper followed them out for 2 years and saw no added or increase laxity at 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. So I think
And
that's
that's a fun Twitter conversation to follow along. If those
Yeah,
of you,
that
those of you that Twitter, just look for Lynn Snyder Mackler and Sue Sigward.
yeah,
Them just kind of going at, and Greg Lehman jumps in there, and
yeah.
it's sometimes hard to follow conversations on Twitter, but that's a good one because you got some smart people just kind of going after it and really talking open chain, closed chain. I mean, we see, you know, when we teach these courses and we talk about that one, you know, squat study, and they looked at hypertrophy too, you see it right there in front of you. You know, you've got the study that does a squat versus a leg curl, and they see greater hypertrophy in the glute, greater hypertrophy in the hamstring, the quad hypertrophy, but not nearly as much as the hamstring or the glute. And it's primarily because the squat just doesn't load up the quad enough. There's not enough work happening in the quad to substantially cause any sort of adaptive change. So at some point you gotta freaking smoke the quad, you know?
Yeah. George,
Yeah,
George Davies and I.
That's the thing that always gets me is, you know, it's like you talk with people and they're like, well, man, do you think this would work for someone who's a chronic ACL person, you know, that's out like 7 months, but still, or a year out and still has atrophy? Well, yeah, but you got to do an exercise that isolates the quad. I mean, if we know the quad's the issue, why would we not isolate that and just target it? That's the, you know.
Yeah. I mean, we got too functional with stuff, you know, and I was the king of Mr. Function, doing all the goofy things, but yeah, an isolated quad is gonna be what you have to do if someone has quad atrophy and quad weakness. I was just saying, George Davies and I spoke at an ACL symposium, Symposium of the Americas, and that's what he was preaching. You know, he had all these guys doing long arc quads that were failed ACLs because they didn't have their quad strength back.
Yeah.
So then if you can throw a tourniquet on at that low level in the early stages. So, okay, but let's go back here. So, okay, post-op day one, you want to get the tourniquet on. You probably need as high of a pressure, or post-op when you can quickly start BFR on someone. You want to get the pressure as high as you can comfortably get them to tolerate it, probably between 70 and 100%. And we have that on our position stand paper. I'm pretty sure what that was what the ranges were. I haven't read it in a long time. And what about frequency? So here's the next thing. People say, well, how much should you get them in during we're still sticking to acute here.
Yeah. So this kind of spans a little bit. Mm-hmm. So ideally, because you want this period to last as short as possible, and you want to start loading them as quickly as you can. So if we're just going to do a passive treatment, it really needs to be frequent. You know, you look at the Takarada papers, the Kubota papers, and then the Natsume paper. Those were pretty much all 2-week studies done twice a day.
Yeah.
And to get the results that they got. So the attenuation and the knee extensor atrophy out of Takarada, the attenuation of strength loss in the Kubota paper with cast immobilization in the ankle, and then the hypertrophy out of the Natsume paper. And then from there, you go into Jamie Burr's paper that did 4 times a week for 6 weeks. So the challenge with that is, I don't think they saw the muscle mass changes. They saw pretty phenomenal strength changes when they combined NMES with cell swelling, but they did it for 6 weeks. I don't know if we necessarily want to hang on to that treatment intervention, that specifically just cyclic BFR for 6 weeks.
Yeah. So go ahead.
It seems like it really depends on your setting, right? And what you're
that's exactly it. 100% true. So if you work in an athletic training setting, or a PT with a pro team or a college team, and you have the ability to get someone in daily, multiple times a day, hands down, man, I think that's the best approach. You know, but in reality, for the outpatient clinic, I'd say at the most you're probably going to get them in 3 days a week. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it always seems to be that discussion on what am I going to get approval for? How many visits am I going to get? Do I want to really burn through all this stuff early on? And it's kind of the difficult discussion of, are we going to get optimal from using this really hard, really early, or are we going to get a little bit more just kind of doing a little bit more maintenance early and then hitting them harder as we get access. So yeah, I think athletic training room, beautiful. Hit them every day, maybe twice a day early, and then progress from there. But yeah, insurance world, 2, maybe 3 days a week is what you're going to get.
And that's better. That's better than none or one, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And in the military,
too,
we're the same as the pro guys. So we owned them. So when we were starting this, and still when we do it, post surgical, you are daily or twice a day in our military setting, in the acute phases until we could start loading you up. So
Yeah. I think for me too, it's so important that we have as physical therapists or physios, if you will, this really good understanding of this disuse atrophy that we talk about in the course, because if you can understand those numbers and how fast it happens,
yeah,
it gets a lot easier to have a conversation with someone that doesn't want to give you authorization when look, you're going to lose 10% of that quad, 30% of that strength in a healthy person just from 2 weeks of unloading, and we can kind of walk them through those things. You can at least make a strong case for, man, we need to try to help this muscle stay around now,
yeah.
so that when this person's able to start moving and stick and load across it, they have the capacity to do so, because we're just watching the capacity go away, and now we're trying to build capacity as well as range of motion and tolerance. And who knows, you may have chewed up so many damn visits just managing their pain and trying to get their range of motion back, So
You chew up all those visits at the start. That's what's beautiful is if we're doing this, we're chewing up visits for pain and range, but we're also slowing down the atrophy train, maintaining muscle strength. If you're combining your BFR with something like E-stim. And I think this is the conversation too. Like, we get a question asked all the time, what are people charging for cash pay? But it might be, you can come 3 days a week, maybe you can talk the patient into coming and doing a cash pay visit, or I don't know exactly how the insurance stuff works outside the military, but could they come more frequently on their own and do something and just say, look, this is the way the pros do it, the military's doing it. If you were at that level, this is what you would do. So a lot of people.
I think what you see over time is these clinics kind of saying, this is our ACL package, and we manage you from, injury to, whatever point, and we'll bill your insurance, but this is kind of our package sort of thing. And then it gets you just kind of this comprehensive access. And then what you do is you just kind of monopolize the ACL market by doing that. It's like, look, man, if you want to really get care, because it's not going to cover it. And the reality is you're going to pay a $6,000 deductible as it is. So why not, as a physical therapy clinic, say, hey, pay us $5 and we'll manage your ACL.
Yeah.
And we'll manage you from today, just 3-4 days after you injured it, all the way out to every time point. And we're going to give you all these different strategies, from protein intake to various time points along the course of your care that you're going to understand and know, and what we're expecting of you. I would back up just a little bit, Zach, and kind of talk. I've used the 100% clinically as well after kind of chatting with you with the neuromuscular stim. And it's been tolerated pretty well by the folks that I've used it on. I put the stim pad up under the cuff. That's been tolerated well. In one particular case, I had a rather acute ACL who had gone up to a physical therapist up north of me and basically been given quad sets immediately post-op. So I get him like 3 weeks post-op. He's in a ton of pain, terrible range. And his pain after doing 5 cycles of inflation and some of that with neuromuscular stim at about 60 degrees, he got out of our Biodex and his pain was substantially less immediately. And his range of motion started tracking along extremely nicely. Within 2 weeks, we were doing near full range of motion and exercise, in that limb, and really kind of getting after it. So in that particular case, it was a marked reduction in pain when he picked his leg up out of the machine. And if that doesn't get you buy-in from a patient, I don't know what will. If they can immediately get this pain reduction and his muscle felt tired after doing it, and we just did.
That's typically what you have to sell too, is like, this is going to suck kind of while it's on. It's hard, but most people get an analgesic benefit, and I don't know if we've discussed it on a podcast yet, the beta endorphins or maybe another pathway, but you're probably going to have less pain once you're done with this in your injured area. And that definitely should get the buy-in, right? I would point out in Luke Hughes' ACL paper, it's not published yet, but they've presented in poster, they had three groups, a higher load post ACL, a BFR low load post ACL, and a healthy non-clinical BFR group. The BFR post ACL group had significantly more muscle soreness type muscle fatigue than the BFR healthy group. So our clinical patients might be feeling it more than we feel when we're doing the labs or messing with it on ourselves. So we just have to kind of be aware of that maybe they're not being wusses. The perception from that study was it was definitely harder for the muscle in the clinical group with BFR. Okay, so we'll agree. So there was this whole cell swelling or passive BFR or ischemic or whatever, post ischemic or pre-ischemic conditioning was done without was done without exercise. When Stephen and I spoke at CSM last year, he was doing all the IPC, not doing exercise, just a tourniquet, and in the end he said, I would always say, if you want the biggest bang for your buck, somehow add some sort of muscle activation. So if they can't do it, add e-stim. So right off the bat, everyone acutely, if you get a tourniquet on them and they can barely do anything, and we're talking about like a knee surgery here, get a stim on them. Okay, so you do that, Zach, and that's a long protocol. Do you do anything else with a tourniquet that day?
Say that again.
So you've done the Natsu, you've done your 5 minutes on for say your protocol again, just so we can reiterate it.
Yeah. So the protocol that I'll do is with that Natsume paper is 5 minutes of ischemia at 100% limb occlusion pressure, 1 minute reperfusion, and that's cycled 4 times. So the total treatment time is going to be 23 minutes, and then I cycle Russian stim 10 seconds on, 30 seconds off throughout that whole time. Even when the cuff's deflated, Russian stim is still going.
Once they're done, do you do anything else with the tourniquet on?
Typically, that's at the end of the treatment. And so what I'll do before or earlier on in a treatment is if I can like straight leg raise, whatever I can do with them, because typically with everyone outside of maybe like a hip scope, but like knee surgeries, Achilles, whenever they come in from whenever they get approval for physical therapy, they can tolerate at least proximal strengthening. So that could be straight leg raise, flexion, abduction, extension from there. And then just to round out the treatment would be the kind of cell swelling with the stem and the quad.
Yep. Anyone else? Different ways they're doing it or seeing from all these other guys and girls doing it?
No, I mean that, I'm mostly kind of focused on trying to get me about 5 inflations and then doing whatever kind of exercise they can do and get them as active as possible. Zach, I wanted to back up a little bit because I don't think you said it in that time when you were describing it, but before you had said you go to 10% MVC. So, but the problem with that in clinic is, well, how are you determining that? So what are you doing to decide that? And do you think there's a different way to do it?
So I think the thing of it is, it gets tricky in a post-op scenario because you just can't necessarily reliably test someone's strength, say like post-op day 1. It's not going to be accurate at all. But if you have kind of conservative management, things like that, whether you have access to a Biodex or a digital dynamometer, and getting at 60 degrees, whatever angle it may be, and assessing strength from there and trying to get them to kick in to the dynamometer, the Biodex, you can use it as part of the treatment and go from there would be how I would assess that.
So if you have a Biodex or a dynamometer or a Humac or something, you put them at 69 degrees flexion and you have them try and do a maximum isometric contraction as hard as they can. And you measure that. Say it's 50 foot-pounds or newtons hour or whatever freaking country and what measurement system you use. And then you would take the stem up until it got them to where they're able to push into it through the stem into about 10%, right?
Right.
Right. And so if you were going to say I'm best of the best, what are the best of the best doing? That would be how you would do it, right?
Yeah. And we did it when I was at Delaware. We legit put them at 50% MVC.
Yeah. So I don't
they
remember,
kicked into the Biodex at 50% MVC.
I don't remember who it was. It was in the APTA Ortho in Denver when we were all sitting around talking, and someone from Delaware said, basically, if you can't measure, take the stem up until they can barely tolerate it, and then take it up some more. So
Yeah.
when in doubt with stem, it looks like more is going to be better no matter what, because you're probably not just guesstimating 50%. You're probably feeling bad for your patient and getting them maybe at 5 or 10%. So
yeah, so that's what Jamie Burr's group did too. They just stemmed to whatever the tolerance of the individual was.
yeah.
So I think that's the key, is higher pressures with minimal to no loads, and then when using stem, as high as stem as they can tolerate, and probably a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I agree. So I think just to wrap this up then, in the acute phase, we want to get them in as early as possible. That's another question we didn't really talk on. You know, we've touched on it multiple times, I think, in previous podcasts. When do you get them in? When they can tolerate a tourniquet on their leg as soon as possible is pretty much when we're getting most of our post-ops, even post-injuries, post soft tissue injuries. Our blog, we talked about it. It seems like the earlier you get them in, the more we can mitigate maybe the fibrotic response, and the faster we can start to slow down the atrophy train. So bullets here. If they can't do anything at all, I mean, if they couldn't even tolerate stem, which everyone should be able to, just a tourniquet alone done for multiple cycles seems to slow down atrophy. And that's been shown in healthy models, and that's been shown in an ACL model. And they started in the ACL model 3 days post. And so if people ask how many times would you turn the tourniquet on and off for different exercises or stem bouts, it seems like best evidence right now and best just what we see is 3 to 5 different rounds. So if they've got a good quad contraction and they can do a straight leg raise or hip abduction or whatever, then you're going to get the tourniquet on and do those mat exercises for 3 to 5 different rounds, which each round is going to be about 5 to 6 minutes if you follow the 30, 15, 15, 15 with 30-second rests, which should be more than enough time for one occlusion cycle. Deflate it between a minute to 3 minutes, whatever their tolerance is. And when you use our stuff, we're always at least doing a 1 minute rest between, and then the tourniquet we use times out for a minute. And then you move into your next exercise. If you're following the protocol that Zach was talking about, the Natsumi article, it's 5 minutes on with a minute rest done for what was it, 4 rounds? I keep blanking. Yeah, 4 rounds.
They did four bouts, yeah.
4 bouts. And so that will give you plenty of inflation cycles. And then you would just do your mat exercises prior to that. Good. So stem pressure probably needs to be higher than what most people are probably doing. Tourniquet pressure in the acute phase probably needs to be higher, as high as you can get it, maybe up to full occlusion. And frequency needs to be as much as you can get them in. If you have the liberty to see them as much as you want, I would see them in the morning and the afternoon for those first couple weeks. If you don't have the liberty, tell the patient they need to get as much as possible, explain anabolic resistance and why you're doing this to them to slow down that atrophy train. Good? Any other points you guys can think of from the acute stage? And then magically, they always say now they're in the subacute phase or the intermediate phase. It bleeds a little bit into, okay, you're not so much acute where you can't really tolerate loads. Maybe you do have hard restrictions like they're non-weight bearing. They had a meniscus repair, cartilage repair, or fracture or something. So if they're in a point where they can't put any load on, you're trying to still stick to this protocol as much as possible. Once they can put load on, we're moving into this intermediate phase. So not so much the cell swelling. We've always kind of called it the metabolite phase, where you start to build up a lot more metabolites. So again, Zach, I'm going to let you roll into, we're going into intermediate phase. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so ideally we're going to start using some resistance with them in whatever exercises they can either tolerate or exercises that they're cleared to do from the procedure standpoint. And with this, the rule of thumb that I go by is one compound movement plus one exercise per muscle group that isolates that muscle group. That typically comes out to being between 4 to 6 exercises for that individual. And the nuances of this, kind of when you look at the hypertrophy research across the board, Brad Schoenfeld put out a review paper looking at, it's not the intra-session volume isn't so much as important as what the weekly volume session is, or the weekly volume per muscle group. And what they found was 10 plus sets per muscle group maximizes the hypertrophy. So if we apply that to what we're doing, say with BFR, take a look at the quad. So we do, say, 4 sets of a squat motion, a leg press, or step ups, whatever that may be. So you do 4 sets there per day. You see them 2 days a week. Then you do long arc quads or knee extensions. Again, that's 4 sets per day. So now we do that twice a week. That's 8 sessions, 8 sets isolated to the quad. Compare and couple that now with 8 sets of a compound movement. So we're at 16 sets per week. That should fully maximize that kind of response in the muscle group. You can apply that then to the hip abductors, to the glutes, to the hamstrings, whatever muscle group. So that's kind of the reasoning and the rationale that I use for that.
Yep. Limb occlusion pressure or arterial occlusion pressure
is going to be 80% in the lower extremity. The caveat to this is going to be dependent on really what they tolerate when you initially get after it. And so if you have someone coming in, acutely post-op and we're cleared, we can load them. They tolerate loading relatively quickly. Maybe we go to, downwards. The lowest I'll go is 60%, and always try to progress them back towards the 80% each visit that I see them. And similar to what we were talking about initially when we were just talking about passive BFR and using higher pressures when minimal to no loads included, the Lefandrel paper did 12 weeks. And what they found was if you increase the load, so if they do tolerate a higher load, you can reduce the pressure. And what they did was 40% 1RM and 40% limb occlusion pressure. So that is the caveat. But if they can only tolerate 20% of a 1RM, that pressure has to be high to get the response you need.
Right. And I think we're seeing more and more kind of dialing in these pressures. Even mild changes might start to make a difference. Grant Mouser's on angiogenesis, 40% didn't have a response in the upper lower extremity, but 80% did. Kyle Hagney's group has the abstract where we had a really large rise in mesenchymal stem cells, CD34 progenitor cells at 80% limb occlusion. Another paper that came out the same week didn't see a rise at 60% limb occlusion pressure. So, it might get in a few years here where we're really saying, for this response, they have to get to this much pressure if we know the load is around here. And so that's always the hard part. Like, how do you know what the load is? Well, probably your load's under 40% in this phase.
Yeah, exactly.
So if your load's under 40%, you're probably going to, and this is what I'm always going to do. I'm saying get them to 80 if they can get there. I think it's important.
Well, and even that paper you just sent us today, Johnny, the one, looking at the myofibrillar protein synthesis and ribosomal biogenesis,
yep.
Like they used a 50% pressure on the leg and had a strength response.
Yep.
But they didn't have a significant increase in satellite cells. They didn't have significant hypertrophy.
Yeah.
And so, as far as the satellite cells and these mesenchymal stem cells, like we've talked about in the previous podcast, it really seems to be a hypoxia thing, or maybe Zach said it might even just be a stress thing. But I do know that 80% is more stressful than 50%. So, it's maybe we're really talking about being able to dial in that stem cell response with that 80% pressure. And like y'all are said, I mean, we're probably not sniffing greater than 30% of that 1 rep max and
Right.
kind of moving into that intermediate phase.
And so that was a really good paper. It was in Frontiers in Physiology. It came out today. So it's full text again. Folks out of Denmark, Peter, I don't ever know how to say his name, Peter Sajaks. But 50% limb occlusion in the lower extremity had a really nice rise in muscle protein synthesis, equal to lifting heavy. And so basically, in a clinical population who's in an atrophied state, who's probably in a downregulated muscle protein synthesis because they're probably in anabolic resistance, there's your muscle protein synthesis pill. 50% limb occlusion made it go up, and 70% 1RM made it go up. And so they did it 3 times a week over 6 weeks. But they did one exercise, so the volume probably wasn't there, right? And the occlusion was only at 50%. So satellite cell content didn't go up, and hypertrophy didn't go up. Strength went up in both groups. The HIT group had strength at 4 weeks, or what was it, 4 days, and I can't remember. We just got it. And then the BFR group, their strength increased at 10 days after, which is interesting, almost to the same amount. But satellite cell content didn't go up, and hypertrophy didn't go up. And I think that's a pressure situation based on what we've seen in the other ones, or volume. Like Jacob Nielsen's paper, they saw this massive rise in fiber size and satellite cell content, but they were doing twice a day, so the volume was big time there.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. I think you look at Nielsen's paper, they created such a shock to the system that satellite cell response peaks out almost at day 8, and then the myonuclear accretion tops out at training day 8 as well. And we don't get really a greater spike beyond that, it seems, because at 3 days post, you've already dropped from 290% to 243. So it leads you to believe, I mean, even though they didn't collect, in between training day 8 and 3 days post, it leads you to believe that there wasn't a substantial increase if it dropped down that much just 3 days after they stopped training.
Right. So again, this paper, just to touch on it because it's brand new, if you have people that you're trying to increase their muscle protein synthesis in this intermediate phase, you can lift heavy at 70% 1RM, or you can put a tourniquet on. They did it at 50%, and they showed it increased probably at 80%. I bet we're going to see an increase even more, especially with that satellite cell content at 3 days a week for 6 weeks, right?
Yep.
You guys agree? And so then we have these other papers that show increases in muscle protein synthetic rate. Fujita's paper, Chris Fry's paper, and that's where we're really maximizing the bang for your buck with BFRs in this intermediate phase. So
the thing I like about the paper we're talking about that came out today is they looked at protein synthesis over a long time point. It wasn't just this little acute upregulation of protein synthesis, which, it'd be great to see some more papers kind of look at that longitudinally, over a period of weeks instead of just what's happening acutely.
Yeah, this deuterium oxide that they used, so you can see over a 6-week period rather than a 3-hour time point and a 24-hour time point, right? Which is, it's pretty cool to see it rise like that. But still, now we have multiple papers that show we can spike muscle protein synthesis with BFR at low load. And so it's really a no-brainer because we have a muscle problem at this stage. And it's like if you use BFR right in the acute phase, you slow down and mitigated atrophy. If you now start to load, now you're going to start to spike more muscle protein synthetic rate, and we're starting to hopefully get hypertrophy and strength coming back, right? So here's the next question I'm going to ask. So when do you stop this phase? When do you start to transition off BFR?
Yeah, so the way that I do it in the clinic is as soon as possible, to be honest with you. And I always tell people, I'm like, you know, that probably sounds pretty funny that here I am, a big advocate of BFR, and I'm telling you that to get away from it as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: is no matter what you know, kind of review, or even this paper that just was put out today in Frontiers, or the Lexandril systematic review in Sports Med, it shows that the strength changes are greatest when you lift at high loads.
Yep.
And so, I mean, so the way that I do it in the clinic is if I see someone twice a day or twice a week, I'll do one day where I focus on muscle hypertrophy. Predominantly, most of those exercises are going to be done with the tourniquet on. Mm-hmm. Even the compound movements. We'll do low loads just because I can facilitate a good muscle hypertrophy response with the cuff. It's equal to lifting at high loads. Then from there, the next day or the next time I see them, we'll focus more on strength changes. And whether that's working isometrics or compound movements at high loads, I structure the treatment to develop maximized strength gains. From there, I may incorporate a couple isolated movements, single joint movements with the cuff to maximize hypertrophy again, just to get added volume for hypertrophy. But that second day is largely to increase strength.
Yep. Yeah. It's so this phase, we're dropping pressure probably down to 80%. If you're worried about them tolerating it, we're going to start at 60 and really, what I do and when we're building these protocols for the studies, everyone's like, do we need to use 80? And it's like, because in the protocol for the study, you have to kind of have everyone starts at one point and then they go to the next point. If you do 60, they can hit that volume and they were okay with it. Then next session, we go to 70. If they hit that volume and they're okay with it, then next session, they go to 80. And then once they're at 80, then it's just about increasing load. So the first few sessions is about increasing pressure. And then the next few sessions is about increasing load, typically, because you just have a standardized approach. But I think you can kind of start to follow that and get them to that 80%. So pressure is a little bit lower. Load is still low. Most of your patients aren't at 40%. So just don't worry about it. Just try and get them to that 80%. And 2 to 3 days a week in this phase is probably the most you need, right?
Yeah. And I think, the big thing of it is it's just like you said, I think sometimes that gets lost, the progressive overload principles still apply.
Yep.
Even though we kind of use the cuff and it makes it harder and whatnot, you still have to load them. And when they complete that 75th rep, increase the load the next time they come in, or just drop that exercise. Maybe you've maxed out the potential of that exercise, so we don't do that anymore. You'll phase out of straight leg raises at some point. Yep. At that point, you just move into another exercise. Yep. They complete 75 reps, increase the load.
And that's the thing, and that's a good point. BFR is hard no matter what. BFR is hard if you're just lifting your sock. And so I think people get stuck in it's hard phase and they don't increase load. If anyone ever hits volume and it's an exercise that you want to keep doing, always increase the load. Always, always, always. It's a moving target up. It should be. So people need to remember that, because then you're going to plateau out. And when people are saying, well, I'm not seeing a change or whatever, it's typically, you're probably not increasing your load. Your pressure's not wrong, or maybe we should discuss nutrition with these individuals. Okay. So that makes sense. How many exercises are we talking about here? I know you talked about it. Everyone else, just so we can say as a consensus, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tourniquet exercises?
I'm kind of on board with what Zach said, somewhere in that, 3 to 6 realm. 3 is kind of minimal. Getting closer to 5 is probably closer to optimal.
Right.
That way you're hitting a compound and then you're kind of isolating your prime movers.
Yeah.
And probably get everything you need 5 to 6. I don't know if there's any reason to go more than that.
No, it's intolerable. Right. But again, these studies that are showing these great changes, they're typically one exercise,
Yep.
So by us doing 2 or 3, you know, I think between the 3 to 6 is the range you look at. And then you move on to the harder, more complex exercises. And I'll reiterate again exactly what Zach said. Get them off the damn tourniquet as soon as you can and start loading. If they can load, freaking load. And there's a lot of people, if you're at a clinic that sees a good amount of patients, you've got 4 or 5 patients that are rolling in that are needing that tourniquet more because they're more acute anyways. BFR is the best in the acute to the subacute. And if you've done their work right, then they should be able to load. And that's a beautiful thing. What about endurance? When do you start throwing endurance into all this?
Yeah, so I do. I think about it a little bit differently. Now, I just eval'd a guy who's getting ready. He wants to try to run the New York City Marathon, and he's coming in with a patellar tendinopathy. So, yeah, exactly right. I told him, you know, my story being in New York City last year was I got there, did a course. I didn't even know that the New York City Marathon was going on when I arrived. Everyone started asking me if I was here for the marathon. So either way. But no,
it's like when I rode in San Francisco and it was Pride Week. Everyone's like, "Are you
kidding?" That's when Kyle decided to invite you, huh?
Yeah, he was there. It was weird. I didn't know you had chaps. He had red chaps. It was weird.
That's where that tourniquets go here picture comes from.
Yeah. Can we not give all my secrets away on one podcast, please? I mean, come on. Dude.
But no, so with aerobic stuff, I typically, now for that individual who, you know, we're trying to basically work some aerobic stuff in with him so he can maintain his training, we'll continue it throughout. But strictly with a muscle standpoint, you know, I'll do the bike early on as that kind of, if someone comes in, say, following a hip scope or something like that, where we can do aerobic exercises before we're allowed to do a lot of resistance training exercises, I use it in that context. Mm-hmm. But once I can start loading them, I don't work with a whole lot of aerobic endurance athletes. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that aspect I try to move away from it. The big reason is, you know, when you work in a clinic with a few different therapists and you have, say, 2 to 3 units, it's difficult to tie up those units with someone on the bike when then you have, you know, 2 other therapists that may need those units for, like you said, an acute individual or for someone they're rehabbing. Yep. But in that sense, yeah, you know, we have a couple different papers out, 2 different papers specifically, looking at 3 times a week for 8 weeks, and we do see really good changes in muscle. For sure, we get muscle hypertrophy, cross-sectional area changes, muscle strength changes, and then 6.5% increase in VO2, cycling at 40% VO2 max for 15 minutes. So it's kind of I think of it as a jack of all trades almost, where you get a muscle mass change, a strength change, and then a VO2 max change. And what's great about that is you do not get muscle strength changes and muscle mass changes from single mode aerobic exercise, no matter the intensity that you're training at. The muscle, you just don't hypertrophy muscle and get strength changes.
Yep.
So, you know, that's the great thing with the cup. So, you know, instead of just either attenuating atrophy with passive cyclic BFR and whatnot, you can actually put them on the bike. And instead of, you know, someone just walks in the door and it's like, oh, hey, you're here, go ahead and do 10-minute warm up on the bike and then meet me over at the 3rd table and then we'll get started. You know, you actually turn the bike into a pretty effective treatment.
Yeah. And again, from our pros and college athletes that we work with, you know, when they're really trying to maintain or maybe increase VO2 during these stages, and they have the luxury of just being able to work it a lot. You know, I know with some of the programming, they've done a few of their BFR exercises and they go do the bike protocol or the walking protocol or something, just because they would like to do that for 6 to 8 weeks. And at the 12th to 14th week, their VO2 capacity is pretty good there. Plus you're getting all the additional, like you said, potential hypertrophy and strength changes from added to that as well. You know, no one's really looked at that combination from a study that I know of. of the combination of resistance training and then, like, say, a bike protocol or something like that. And what do you get from it? Is it just too much or not? It seems in the cases we've done it to work really well with some really high-end athletes. But if you can't get in these type of exercises for whatever reason, I know we did it a bunch in the military with our stress fractures, just walking or riding the bike with it, or an elderly patient. Don't forget that exercise because you seem to check all boxes: strength, hypertrophy, VO2. Not as much of a high level as you would with resistance. That's always going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, but that is an easy go-to if you're like, okay, I just want to kind of do something to get all these in. And the typical time frames, 15 to 25 minutes. I think we put in our paper 15 to 20 minutes or something, 15 to 25 in the position stand, but.
Right.
Yeah. And
I just wonder though, how many people are actually hitting that kind of frequency and duration with an endurance-based application in clinic to mimic what's going on with the studies. How many people are really doing 2 or 3 days a week of hitting a bike for 15 minutes for 8 weeks. So I think it probably depends a lot on your patient as far as how much you prioritize that. But I agree. I mean, it seems like there's kind of a lot of things to be had for an endurance-based application with BFR, and if nothing else, maybe working it in and that kind of getting into that intermediate phase to break up some of the monotony of the low-level exercises. Giving them something different that's going to be a worthwhile stimulus. Kind of breaking down a session that way a little bit.
And again, pressure in the endurance protocols with a bike or a walking is that 60 to 80% typically. I can't remember if that was what we put in the position stand. I should have read that paper before I got back on here to remember what all we said, but that's what I follow. And Jeremy Lenick and I, we wrote that, from the lab to the clinic paper. And basically for the endurance exercises, from what we saw and agreed on, 80% was what you should, again, target for those. I will mention it's freaking hard as hell. We had a sponsored study, or not sponsored, but we kind of helped a university with one, and they started at 80, but they just couldn't get people through it. So they took it down to 60. They were looking at more of calorimetry type stuff. But the constant cal paper, right? It was 80% for 30 minutes. Isn't that what we?
Yeah. I have trouble with that. I mean, 30 minutes at 80% occlusion, and I just do not see many people achieving that. Yeah. So unless that was their target and they didn't really report when people actually failed and tapped out. Yeah. And they did use a really wide cuff. It was like an 18 centimeter cuff, so that's 7.5 inches or so. Pretty darn wide. Their average pressure seemed a little low doing an 80%. It was like 95 millimeters of mercury. So,
but probably not for that wide of a cuff, right?
Yeah, maybe not for that wide of a cuff. I haven't had a chance to really use something like that consistently.
Yeah, that's what we use.
That idea of 30 minutes straight, because even getting some really well-trained individuals to try and complete 15 on the bike is hard to come by.
And what was the results of the Concecal paper, just to remind everybody?
Yeah, so you're looking at about 10% increase in cross-sectional area, which was on par with what they got with 4 sets of leg presses at 70% of a 1RM.
Yep.
Strength changes were absolutely greater in the leg press, and that's what they measured strength by. But you still had a significant increase in leg press strength as well. The other group, or the other arm in that study, was cycling at 70% VO2 for 30 minutes.
Right.
And they saw no changes in muscle, whether muscle mass or strength.
Right.
And then looking at VO2, the greatest change in VO2 came out of the group cycling at 70% of a 1RM, or 70% VO2. But the group cycling at 40% of their VO2 demonstrated a significant increase in VO2 max as well.
Yeah.
So, like I said, you get kind of the best of both, or all worlds here. You get a muscle change, muscle mass change, a strength change, and then your VO2 max.
Yeah.
The caveat with all that too, that I always point out, and I think we pointed out in the course, is if you're looking for a VO2 max change, I think the cuffs have to be worn bilaterally versus if you're looking from purely a muscle standpoint, I think you can get by with just having the cuff on one leg or one limb.
Yeah.
But
we don't have the studies yet to prove that, but that's what we say and believe right now.
Right. Yeah. I think, a lot of that when you look at the changes in what contributes to the physiologic changes in VO2 max, whether it's capillary density,
Mitochondria.
Changes in mitochondria, things like that. Those are peripheral changes in the ability to extract oxygen, to create a larger arterial venous O2 difference. So
for sure,
yeah.
It totally makes sense, and we believe it. But it would be someone, maybe it's one we need to look at setting up is a unilateral versus a bilateral because it just hasn't been done. It's much more tolerable, So it'd be interesting to see. Okay, so anything else on this intermediate phase that y'all can think of that we've missed? So bullets here, 2 to 3 times a week. This phase is when they can start to load. So if they were non-weight bearing or protected or whatever, and they're actually getting to where they could do a leg press or some sort of step up or something, get the tourniquet on with some load. Pressure's probably at 80% if they can tolerate it. If not, try and get them there. If they hit volume, take them up each time. The standards like take them up 10%, but whatever, some people's presses don't allow that. So try and take the weight up if you can. And I think that's it. Once they are at the point where you feel like they can start to handle more of a moderate load, then you start to get them off the tourniquet and you load it. I don't, and most people we teach and talk with, we don't start decreasing pressure and going into the 50, 70% 1RMs with the tourniquet on. I just don't think extra occlusion when they're already probably at a pretty good occlusion because of the muscle contraction is giving you anything extra. And it's just miserable. So if they can load, just keep loading them.
Yeah, there was actually a paper looked at low load BFR, high load BFR, and then high intensity training. You don't get any added benefit out of high load BFR, whether it be muscle mass. The strength changes were similar to low load BFR, and pennation angle was the same as well. So, I think I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and there will be a presentation in AOSSM that I think will that will also kind of validate that same study. So the other thing to point out too, you can get adaptive changes for muscle protein synthesis if you do low load without a tourniquet, but you have to do high volume. And so it's a lot of volume. And so I don't ever want us to like skip over that. You can get there, but it's a lot of volume to failure. And in clinical situations, that's probably not ideal. So really, BFR is just a way to get that muscle to failure quickly to decrease load. So the volume's much lower.
Yeah, I think Oregard did a study on that actually. 10 sets of 36 reps of squats, so it turns out 360 squats.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's not only is that just a ton of volume that's really gonna, it's gonna make you a little sore, but also you have to factor in, doing 10 sets of 36 reps of squats that's gonna take a lot of time.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's pretty much gonna be one or you're going to do 1 or 2 exercises in your treatment.
Yeah, and most clinical patients would never tolerate that.
Right, and I think we can all agree as far as changes for strength, loading always wins, right? I mean, we can say, multi-rep max, we might get something fairly similar. Hypertrophy might be something fairly similar, but heavier load, if you can do it, always wins.
Yep. Agree. All right. And then, I think the chronic phase we don't have to really get into because the chronic phase is now get at it, man. Get at it with your strength coach, get at it with your good therapist, or, okay, I gave you good muscle, you're good to go, and here's your gym program, and you got to keep doing this and start increasing load in the chronic phase, right?
Yep.
Good. All right. So that's progressions. Any other points y'all can think of on that?
I'd say one of the things that the clinic is always messy, right? And so you're going to be transitioning someone, during one of these phases, and they're going to come in and they might have just done too much at home, or they might be blown up or some kind of something like that. I remember a specific case where I had a guy post mastectomy. We've been doing BFR stuff. It was really time to kind of move him towards loading stuff, and we were kind of working that way. He comes in blown up because he just did a bunch of stuff over the weekend, little honeydews and that kind of thing. And normally I might have to say to that guy, look, man, probably just best to go home, cancel the visit. I don't do that anymore. I'm like, well, we'll just BFR today.
Yeah.
I mean, just fill it in that space so that you're still kind of keeping that process moving forward for him. That might create a bit of a pain reduction. I think, we unfortunately still kind of fight this notion that there are these kind of clean demarcations of transition from one phase to another, and that's never ever how it happens. And the way you're adding load to your patient probably looks different every single time you treat an ACL reconstruction, or a total knee, et cetera. I mean, it gets kind of sloppy, and I think we need to understand those signals, as I like to always kind of go back to. And for us, it's like, man, try to make them really stinking tired, try to stick a good amount of volume on them, and try to get away from that goofy tourniquet as fast as you can.
Yeah.
While you're loading them up heavy. So.
Yeah. And then I remember a case too, and this is they went to load and did it for a little bit, but then they kind of developed this rip roaring anterior knee pain. And then they had to kind of go back, and they came back to BFR because that's the only thing they could really tolerate to try and keep working on their quad, because their knee just wasn't handling that load as well. So we had to do that for a little bit longer, and then they slowly progressed back into it. So you're right, man. You kind of shift back and forth for sure. All right, good, man. So we solved the progression puzzle. We're done, man. Woo! All right.
Well, I think there's still something to address there, though. We talked about the acute and the intermediate phase, but based on that blog you sent us the other day, I feel like we need to address this hyperacute phase of rehab. Isn't that something we're leaving out there? Maybe we'll put that out in the Facebook group or something. So.
The Gomer blog, man. My favorite blog in the world. Hyperacute PT. 36 therapists working on one patient for 1 minute. All right. So we got a question. We're going to do one question because as normal, we went long. So this is from Rob. It's a chip shot question, but it's a good one. Do you have any data with a healthy geriatric population? Any scientific reason to believe that this may help reverse sarcopenia? And I would say yes, we do. So two just easy places to go to if you don't want to believe it just from us. I think Kyle Hackney's article he wrote in Techniques in Orthopedics for us, it was mitigating dynapia and sarcopenia through BFR in the geriatric population. He reviewed the literature and really came to the conclusion that this looks like it is prime for this population from what we've seen. And then probably the most recent one to really back it up is the systematic review and meta-analysis from Chris Sentner over in Germany. You guys familiar with that one?
Yeah, that one is I think the go-to. I mean, the effect sizes on that are huge.
It's crazy.
Yeah, you're looking with resistance exercise, you have an effect size of increasing strength of over 2. And then when you compare it with walking, the effect size to increase strength over 3. Yeah. Just huge effect sizes.
Yeah, I mean, those effect sizes are like, you almost have a 100% chance that they're going to get better.
Yeah.
We just had a big call last week because we're starting this multi-center TKA trial, and the surgeons are like, I'm not sure. I see all the people you work with, Johnny, and we work with different people here. They're elderly, and I'm not sure if this is ripe for this people. And it's like, man, it is. This is the group that it's the most ripe for. They seem to respond better. A little bit of muscle change in them is a much bigger deal than our athletes there. So we can't say it's a cure for sarcopenia, but it definitely looks like it's an avenue. I have no problems putting it on a geriatric patient. And I feel like they're going to be the ones that are going to gain the most from it. And we were happy to see at our facility, they really tolerated and liked it. Right.
Yep.
Cool. Anything else, fellas?
We
All right.
got it.
Got it? So
There you go.
just to wrap it up, if you want to check out one of our courses, go to our website, owensrecoveryscience.com. We have courses. We got one in London this weekend. The podcast will probably be out after that, so you're hearing it too late. Got another one coming up in Austria, and then tons all over the U.S. and more coming up in Canada. Probably going to have one over in Asia again here pretty soon. So go to our site to get a deeper dive. Once you get certified, and you're part of our group, we have a private group where we all discuss this stuff between each other and ask questions and answer them. You'll get specific emails from us with updates on literature like the paper that came out today. And you get to hang out with a bunch of like-minded folks. So that being said, man, thanks for the long podcast again. I told my wife it'd be about an hour. What are we in, 2 hours now or something? But
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Owens Recovery Science Podcast. Owens Recovery Science is a single source for PTs, OTs, ATCs, DCs, MDs, and other medical professionals seeking certification in personalized blood flow restriction rehabilitation training. Find them online at owensrecoveryscience.com.